What's going on at the Bastille?
They're going to be having a movie screening of Smokey and the Bandit tomorrow at 6:30. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to talk about the next. We've talked about the Enlightenment, and we talked about the, oh gosh, we did the Renaissance and then the Reformation and then the Enlightenment. Now we're going to do Romanticism. And at the end of all this, I promise we're going to get back to talking about actual people, but it's important to understand what kinds of things are influencing the people and why they're making some of the decisions that they are. So let's get into this. The first thing, one of Newton's third law of motion is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which is nice because it keeps coming true. So this is one of the laws of motion that pretty much remains true. A lot of his stuff is thrown out the window by Einstein, but this one isn't. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the same is true of the Enlightenment. So during the Enlightenment, that was called the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, that was called the Age of Reason. And the Age of Reason was based around the idea that everything could be understood and everything should be understood, that facts should be revealed, that knowledge is power. Okay, but there was a reaction to that because in the midst of all of this new technology, knowledge is power, facts are awesome, there were also some other developments that happened as a result of that. One of them is the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution took things like factories and made them really productive and kind of threw out the human elements a little bit. And as a result of that, there's a reactionary period that's called the Counter-Enlightenment. And the Counter-Enlightenment took the ideas of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and kind of pushed against them, pushed back against them. And we call that the Age of Romanticism. And that's based on the Romans, not based on anything that has anything to do with love. Okay, the identifying characteristics of Romanticism are that it focuses around the same ideals as like ancient Roman ideals. So it's romance, not Rome. I mean, no, not love. It's not really tied to love until later. So ideas about chivalry, ideas about ancient heroes, you know, heroes bucking against the system, things like that. The idea of truth being more important than knowledge. These are ancient Roman ideas. So we call that the Romantic period.
So would this be kind of like the Guy Fawkes period, or was that before this?
Oh, let me think. Guy Fawkes. Yeah, I think this is Guy Fawkes' Romantic era. I'll have to look that up. I'd have somebody Google that for me. When was Guy Fawkes? Okay, so here's a painting. Take a look at this painting while we're looking that up. This is a reaction to, this is an experiment on a bird in an air pump. For some reason, the lettering is gray instead of white, so you can't see it. I'll fix that later. But take a look at what's happening in this picture. What do you see? Now, what they're basically doing is that they're going to pump all the air out of this chamber and the bird's going to die. As a demonstration of what happens when you create a vacuum. This is part of the scientific revolution. This is an experiment being done in somebody's house, proving the, you know, existence of the movement of air and all that kind of stuff. So, but what do you see in this painting?
You see some fear?
Well, look at this little girl's face. What do you see here?
Fear.
Punishment or
Yeah. Why do you think we see fear? Because
the other lady's covering her eyes.
Yeah, we see somebody here covering their eyes, somebody here turning away, this person not really looking. The father is pointing up, trying to get the girls to look up. And what is this guy doing? Who's he looking at?
he's the wizard. He's the one that's like.
Yeah, he's looking at the painter. So he's looking at you, right? He's looking at the observer. So he is addressing you directly. And basically the point of having a character in a painting look at the observer is to have them ask the question, so how do you feel about all of this? You know, this is a counter-enlightenment painting. This is a painting that is specifically designed to demonstrate the evils of the scientific revolution. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Okay, so we see this dark side of the Enlightenment. We see this in a couple of different places. Can you go away? How do I make you go
chat. It's got that chat notification, so.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Cool, can I charge for this hour?
Yes. Okay, so there are some things that happen as a result. Remember, the Enlightenment is responsible for the American Revolution. The Enlightenment is responsible for the idea that individuals have rights, and those rights should be protected. And if you have a king who is not protecting those rights, you should overthrow that king, right? And the American Revolution took that and, you know, shrugged off the power of Britain. They didn't actually do it themselves. The French did it for them. But then the people of France actually turned around and tried to do it in their own country. And they had a revolution against the oppressive nobility and aristocratic class in their own country. But unlike what happened in America, they then turned around and began systematically executing the aristocratic class of their country. So the revolution was good. That was the Enlightenment idea. Each of these peasants in the 3rd district, they have their rights, and those rights deserve to be protected. That's Enlightenment, that's good. But the revolution in which they actually executed through the guillotine 30,000 members of the nobility in the space of just a couple of years, that's bad, okay? So General Bonaparte helping the people to raise up and lift themselves into a more structured France is good. Emperor Bonaparte is bad. So the Enlightenment produced these things, and because there were bad aspects to them, there is a pushback against it, and that's why there's a counter Enlightenment.
So he was good when he had hair?
He has hair in both. What are you talking about?
He has luscious locks in the first one.
One fist, Jordan. You do not be. Yes. Okay. So the basic ideas of the Romanticism versus Enlightenment. In the scientific revolution, uncovering facts leads to knowledge. In the Enlightenment, knowledge is power. Romanticism, truth is more important than knowledge. So truth is power. Well, truth is a really amalgamous idea. Truth is one of those things that it's moldable. So you never really actually settle on what exactly is truth. But to the Romantic, truth is the ultimate reality. So that's for them. Knowledge is gained. How you find out what truth is knowledge is gained through the senses. You know what things are because you can see them, you can smell them, you can taste them, you can touch them. Those are the senses. That's knowledge. But truth comes from within. Truth is something that springs from within you. In order to find truth, you have to follow your emotions. You have to follow your feelings. And real genius, according to the Romantics, can only come from something that is original. So if you are an extremely gifted scientist who is able to take many things and put them together and create an idea out of those facts and out of those knowledge, that's not genius. That's just really smart. Genius would be if you manifested the idea from within you and then, you know, somebody else set about to prove it, according to the Romantics. The reason for that is because, well, let's talk about romantic heroes first. Another defining characteristic of a romantic is who the heroes are. In the Enlightenment, heroes are worldly intelligent people, people who are educated, people who are part of the system, people who have raised up through the system and taken power and are sophisticated and want to be a part of civilization and make civilization better. Those are Enlightenment heroes. Okay, but in romantic heroes, these are people who live outside of the system. They're youthful, they're naive, they're innocent. They follow their gut rather than following any pre-existing knowledge that they already had. And more than anything, what they want to be is in nature. They want to be part of the landscape. They want to be outside of civilization. And that's what a romantic hero is. That's how a romantic hero is defined. This movement, the Romantic movement, takes its roots from something called Sturm und Drang, which is storm and urgency. Drang is a tricky word. This was a play about the American Revolution that was staged in Germany. Okay, so it was staged right like at 1781, I think, 1782. So it was staged right at the end of the revolution, about the revolution. And the people who went to see it were expecting a play to follow the formula that plays up until that point had always followed. But instead, this play shocked them. It dismayed them. There were loud noises. There was emotion. There was, it was in your face. It was very aggressive. And it shocked the audience, and they had an emotional reaction to it, and it trended across Europe. because of that. Nobody is allowed to judge me for my Avengers ringtone.
Well, because plays before then were mainly Shakespearean, right?
Right. Shakespearean plays follow a pattern that's very predictable. And I'm to somebody who had never seen Romeo and Juliet, maybe it was shocking that Romeo and Juliet both die, but that story was so old by the time Shakespeare got to it that it followed a formula. But even so, it wasn't performed in such a way to evoke an emotional reaction from the audience. It was performed in such a way so that the audience could follow the plot. But to suddenly have a character jump out at you and startle you and break down in front of you and make you uncomfortable, that was new. And that was something that existed in this context. So romantic authors, authors from this time period tried to grab onto that trend and try to make it happen in other mediums. They had heroes that were sensitive and excitable and conflicted and unpredictable. And when things happened to them, you felt it as a reader. You were like emotionally invested and uncomfortable while you were reading it. The idea was to surprise and shock the readers. Romantic literature is defined by the fact that while you're reading it, you're surprised by what direction it goes. So Frankenstein, for example, is a work of romantic literature. It's from the Romantic era. The story of Frankenstein makes you unsure how you feel. Who is the real monster? How do you feel about what happened to this creature that Dr. Frankenstein created? And how do you feel about Dr. Frankenstein's positions? You get to the end of the book and you're not sure how you feel about it, and you've had an emotional reaction to it. The Vampire, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was a very powerful romantic piece by Victor Hugo, and was written specifically for a French audience to make them feel what had happened to them, you know, in their own history. That happened over. Yes.
Well, so since Victor Hugo's on here, I'm guessing that means that Les Miserables was like considered romanticism.
Yes, but Les Miserables is based around a conflict that happens a little bit later. So,
Okay.
but yes, everything Victor Hugo is a romantic. So so that's a great example. How you feel about Jean Valjean in Les Mis is conflicted. You feel conflicted about him. You want to root for him, but you understand he's on an emotional roller coaster throughout the story, and you're not sure how much you want to invest because you're pretty sure he's going to die and bad things are going to happen to him, and you feel that. That's romantic literature. In America, that was James Fenimore Cooper, who was the big romantic author. There were others, Edgar Allan Poe, technically, Washington Irving, who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and lots of short stories. These were romantic authors. They have heroes that live kind of on the edges of society, that kind of live outside. Last of the Mohicans is a great example because the main character hero in Last of the Mohicans was actually ostracized from society because he was a white man who'd been raised by the Mohican people. And so he didn't belong in either place. So he's a great example of a romantic hero. Music also started to reflect this idea of let's try to make the audience feel things. You know, let's try to make them feel instead of just presenting them with something that's technically excellent and follows a lot and takes a lot of interesting, you know, risks, musically speaking, and you can point to it and go, well, that's brilliant. Instead, let's make it something that will evoke a reaction. And so romantic composers like Beethoven, Chopin, Schubert, Wagner. How many of y'all have ever seen the Bunny Rabbit one, the Bugs Bunny opera?
Yeah, he's supposed to be Wagner, isn't he?
Yeah, the Ride of the Valkyries. You know, these are Wagner. He was big on evoking an emotional response, which we kind of live in a post-romantic world. So we're like, if it doesn't make you feel something, why are we even bothering with it? But before this movement, that's not how music treated people. Music was supposed to be enjoyable for its proficiency. The idea of it actually making you, you know, tear up in the middle of other people, like in an audience, to actually have an emotional reaction, that's ridiculous. It also happens in religion. Now, we have talked a lot. We didn't talk as much about religion as I normally would have because I made you watch that stuff on your own. But I will say that the interpretation of salvation up until this point had been largely about legalism, had been about checkmarking things, right? Your own personal feelings about your salvation are not important because there's check marks that you need to get through. So one of the things that happens during this movement is a religious leader kicks back at Calvin and kicks back at the predestination idea. But he's not Luther either, because he has this whole other idea. Calvinism follows this system that we refer to as TULIP, which is total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. That's what TULIP stands for. And the idea of that TULIP system is, okay, so when you're born, you're automatically full of sin. That's something you can't help. You're just automatically full of sin. You're teetering on the brink of hell at all times. And it is God's pleasure to save some of us, and he's already decided which ones. Okay, so limited atonement, there's a little bit that you can do to make your situation in the world better, but there's only a certain amount you can do. You have no choice about whether or not you're saved. Irresistible grace. And the perseverance of the saints, the people who are part of the community of believers, has a responsibility to keep being a part of the community of believers. Joseph Arminius answers with something we call DAISY, which is diminished depravity, abrogated, these are big terms, but what it basically means is everybody is born with the possibility of being saved, and everybody has the option to be saved, and it is possible to step forward into that salvation should you choose to. That idea brings with it a whole different attitude towards salvation on the part of the ministers. And a good example of this is John Wesley. John Wesley was an Anglican minister who was very unhappy with the holiness of the other Anglican ministers. He didn't believe that they were holding themselves to a high enough standard. It was more of a bureaucracy. And so he began with his brother Charles, he began a club specifically designed to hold them to that higher standard through regimented prayer and acts of mission that they all agreed to. He had 22 questions his Holy Club asked themselves every single day. And those 22 questions were ridiculous. I don't want to get too into that in this class. That's more of a different kind of history class. I teach that in my 1301 class sometimes, but the idea was to hold yourself to this standard like a regimen, like a rigid thing. This is an Enlightenment idea. This is a scientific method applied to salvation idea. That if you hold yourself to this standard, then you will be able to live a holier life and be a better minister. That was the idea.
Are you going to talk about the cross-eyed preacher?
Say what?
Are you going to talk about the cross-eyed preacher in this class?
I'm going to just skate right by him, but yes, I'm going to talk about the cross-eyed preacher. Okay, so this club that he had, he started at Oxford College called the Holy Club. And they were so methodical in the way that they did things that their classmates made fun of them and called them Methodists, a name which stuck. Okay, that was a nickname that was given to them as a mockery, but it stuck. So this group of Anglican people identified as Methodists inside the Anglican Church. Now that fell apart for him when he went to Georgia as what he hoped was a really good holy person. He went to Georgia and found out that it wasn't anything like he expected, and then he got in trouble because he refused to give communion to a woman who had rejected him, who happened to be related to the town magistrate. And he had to run for his life back to America, back to England. And by the time he got there, he was like, everything that I thought I believed has fallen apart. All of these, he was extremely well educated. He was always looking for answers. He was an Enlightenment thinker, okay? And then one day, he went with his brother. Okay, Jordan, you're babbling. Okay, one day he went with his brother to hear a reading of the book of Romans and to hear a presentation about it, a sermon about it. And while he was there, he had this emotional reaction that he called a strange warming of the heart. His heart was strangely warmed. We call that in the Methodist Church the Aldersgate experience, because it was in Aldersgate Street that he had this experience. But all at once, he had this emotional reaction that said that he was saved. And that changed everything about his ministry. It was such a powerful moment for him that he turned around and began encouraging his followers to try to find their way to that emotional reaction. So he went from an Enlightenment thinker to a romantic thinker in one fell swoop. And the movement that he started also shifted from enlightenment to romantic, just like that. In the wake of this, there was the religion of enlightenment was deism. Deism is belief in God and God-given reason. You know, God created the universe and then took his hands off of it and left it to us. That's deism, okay? You probably have encountered people who believe this way. As a matter of fact, if you're a supernatural fan, that's their whole basis of their identity of the higher powers, is that God created the universe and then walked away from it. That was the Enlightenment religion, was deism. There's no Trinity, there's no Bible, there's no, the whole Bible is up for interpretation, there's no 100% answers to anything, all of that. But in the wake of this emotional response, there's a whole wave of preachers who come through Europe and then America who believe that there should be an emotional moment where you are saved. And that creates revivals in the tens of thousands of people. This is where the cross-eyed preacher comes in. Probably the most popular preacher was George Whitefield. I don't think I have him specifically in here, Jordan, sorry. But he was a student of John and Charles Wesley. He was a fanboy of John and Charles Wesley, actually, because he was like 19 when they were in their 30s. And he took what they taught, the emotional reaction that he could create through his preaching, and he had revivals all the way across Europe and all the way across America, where people were like trying to find an emotional connection to Jesus. And that became a part of religion as a whole. You need to feel it. You can't just study it and then do it. You have to feel it. You have to feel that emotion. So the religion of the Romantic era is transcendentalism. Truth must transcend knowledge. It's not enough to just study. You have to feel. You have to seek for that inner relationship. The idea that there is a connection between all people, and that connection is guided by an oversoul. Like you have your soul and I have my soul, but there's an oversoul that's trying to draw us all together, that's trying to give us all knowledge. And that
This
is
sounds very zen.
Say again?
This sounds very zen.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But you also have to remember there's a lot of intersection with the Eastern world at this time. So it's possible that it is. But most transcendentalism comes from Germany. Like it starts in Germany. An individual doing good is in the majority. So the transcendentalism is a movement that comes out of Romanticism. It's like, yes.
I need to show you something quickly. It's actually from your husband.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second.
Sorry to bother you.
Okay. I really can't do anything about that. But I appreciate you letting me know. You know what? Send him a message back that just says kitty litter. Okay. His car is stuck. He can't move his car. So he's trying to get me to solve this problem in the middle of class. We're gonna have words about that later. But anyway, okay. So Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, these are people who lived inside of nature and tried to use the lessons of nature to inform how else they were supposed to behave. Transcendentalists want to rise above who you are as just a flawed human being and really strive for something bigger in yourself. It's about perfection of the self. Okay, so the communities that formed in these transcendental environments were cult communities. There were, not all transcendentalists were cultists, but there were cults that were formed. Places where they tried to create a perfect little community of transcendentalists. And a couple of those, the Oneida community, for example, practiced free love and eugenics and birth control in order to guide the creation of perfect children. Like, take this person and their gifts and this person and their gifts and make them have kids, and that way their kids will be better. You know, so to try to create a rise above and create a more perfect human race.
Well, people do it all the time with animals.
Yeah, I mean, breeding programs are we find those all throughout history, but This is as the only difference really is that in this case it was well, there was voluntary participation, which the Nazis were not big on.
And they tried to kill everyone out mostly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that the Nazis edited was by mass extermination, and you don't find too much of that in the Transcendentalists.
So would like everyone stuff like that be considered a transcendentalist stuff like that? The transcendentalist.
Transcend.
Would Heaven's Gate be a transcendentalist example? Probably not, just from the basis of that's a cult of personality. Heaven's Gate was centered around a person.
Not Heaven's Gate, but the one with the Kool-Aid.
That was definitely a cult of personality. That was centered around the person. But yeah, most of those are cults of personality. These were organized people of transcendentalists who wanted to pull out of society and create something new. Their own
It was
little,
kind of the hippie movement
yeah, a little bit. I mean,
What about
of their time.
yeah, the village is a transcendental idea. It's the idea that we can pull out of society and create for ourselves something new and something better. Another religion that comes up during this time is the Mormons. And I don't want to spend too much time on the Mormons because I don't know as much about them as I'd like to, but this was a movement of a revelation that was made, a new revelation was made to a prophet in America, Joseph Smith. And as a result, an entire movement of people sprung up out of this new revelation and this new interpretation, these new scriptures. And they had a lot of trouble finding a place where they could peacefully live. And they weren't always peaceful people. If you study the history of the Mormons, you know that there were fights where they actually armed up and fought. You know, they weren't always peaceful people, but they had a lot of trouble finding a place to live. One of the defining characteristics that got them in the most trouble was the tendency to be polygamous. The early founders of the Mormon Church were polygamous, so they had a lot of communities that wanted to push them out. Okay, so in social sciences, the counter-Enlightenment voice was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He believed that the original Enlightenment thinkers, that Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, had been wrong, that people in their most natural state are not brutish, and they're not mean-spirited, and they're not homicidal. They're actually very kind, and what makes them rough with each other, what makes them aggressive towards each other, is actually the possession of private property. Did y'all have a chance to look at all at Rousseau's work last week? All right, you're gonna need to go back and look at it at some point because the social contract is gonna come up in an exam probably. But Rousseau's belief was that private property makes people bad. And that was all he had to say about it. He wasn't trying to push a movement when he was doing it. He was saying that everybody who surrenders everything they have to society and allows society to own it instead of them is happier. You know, a homeless man is happier than a person with property because he has less worries, he has more freedom, he has the ability to just live. And that was Rousseau's contribution. Okay, so Romanticism in political spheres. Okay, we're going from a time where structure was incredibly important, where your participation in the government was based on your ability to rise up through the ranks. Remember, in European society, it was the nobles who were in charge and the knights who were in charge. And eventually it's going to be the landed merchants who are in charge. It's the upper crust who gets to make all of the decisions. But Romanticism celebrates these rogue spirits that come out of nowhere and rise up through the ranks. They celebrate them. They're not anomalies. They're actually to be celebrated. So heroic individuals, individuals with imagination and using their imagination more than they use their education. It's more important to be imaginative than it is to be educated. Throw off the chains of classical notions like who should be in charge of you because of their birthright. Throw off those ideas. And then there is this idea that in addition to having a right to life and a right to liberty and a right to property, there's one more thing that each individual person has, and that is destiny. Each individual person has a story they're supposed to be living out, has a fantastic epic that they're supposed to be living, okay? So, and that destiny will find you, that destiny will be revealed to you, is something that is written into this, romantic ideology. So each individual peasant has their own destiny, Okay. Napoleon Bonaparte is the quintessential romantic hero in the political world. Napoleon Bonaparte was not nobly born. He was not part of the nobility. He worked his way up the chain of command until he became a general at 24 through his innovation. He was an innovative officer, and as a result, he kept having triumphs where other people had failures. And so he was promoted and promoted and promoted for his imagination, for his innovation. He wasn't that well educated. He wasn't classically trained. He wasn't a part of the race of aristocrats in France. He was just innovative and he was just imaginative. So when the revolution happened in France and everything fell apart and the assembly didn't know how to pull it all back together again, Napoleon Bonaparte swept in from outside because he was away during all of that and saved the turmoil of the French. He saved them from their own turmoil. He used the already structured existence of the military to impose a structure so that there could be peace amongst the people in France. When he was crowned, he made a conscious decision that should have given everybody a clue about what he was going to do next. He had the Pope crown him with the French. The Pope is supposed to do that. Is supposed to crown him, so that you have the divine authority of the Pope to rule France. But when he was crowned, he didn't wear the French crown to his own coronation. He wore a laurel wreath that was reminiscent of what the Roman emperors wore. He wore a golden laurel wreath, and he took the crown and put it on his wife. Okay, so at his own coronation, he was already shrugging off the idea of just being the King of France. He was already taking on the aspect of a Roman emperor instead. He immediately separated the government from church control. He immediately detached the government from the rigid control of the Catholic Church, which was still very big in France. And he relied on his own intuition. So he's the quintessential idea of a romantic hero. So this laurel wreath should have been a clue of what he was going to do next. Bonaparte was never just going to be the King of France. It was never his intention to just be the French emperor. He wanted an empire that stretched across. Bonaparte actually believed that it was his responsibility to cause what had happened in France to happen in other European countries, to take the aristocratic element out of the equation and bring the people and let the people be in charge, under him. Let them be in charge under his authority. So he began to move into areas that were not previously controlled by France. He attacked the Rhineland in Germany. And in Germany, he faced a coalition of people that opposed him, Britain and Austria and Russia, but he defeated them. He marched his army in and defeated them. And the defining characteristic of his army was made out of Frenchmen, okay? In a country that for most of its existence, you would not have referred to yourself as a French person. You would have referred to yourself as a Parisian or a Norman or an Aquitanian. You would have referred to yourself from what region you were from, because you were under the command of a noble. Well, they've executed all their nobles. So he has united them under this idea that, no, you're more than that. You're more than just a Norman or an Aquitanian or a Parisian. You are a Frenchman, and that means something more. So he united his entire army under this identity of Frenchmen. We are France. Vive la France. And then he managed to march into areas and win battles in those areas with this coalition of people who were united despite their wealth, despite their class, despite where they were born, because they were Frenchmen. So by 1807, he had imposed a continental alliance over a big chunk of Europe. And in 1809, he took over the Iberian Peninsula. So he took over Spain and Portugal. So here is a map of how far he went. These are the areas. This is France, okay, so this is already French. This is the part of the Ottoman Empire that France controls. These are the kingdoms that Napoleon took control of. These are states that are under his control. The pink ones are ones that agreed to be his allies so that he wouldn't take control over them. So, and then the yellow ones are the holdouts. The yellow ones are the ones that didn't quite. And it says that Portugal was against him, but actually the Portuguese crown fled to Brazil at this time. So I don't know how strong their opposition actually was, because they fled to Brazil. So the Portuguese people might have been against Napoleon, but the crown was like, I'm out of here. So this is how much of Europe Napoleon controlled as a result of his innovation and his imagination and his refusal to fit within the structure. This didn't last forever. Eventually, he decided to try to go into Russia. Anybody who's ever... Yes?
No, I was just saying,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was just an emotional response. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Anybody who's ever actually looked at the geography of Russia knows that this was a bad idea. He decides to try to march his army into Russia, and the Russian army does what the Russian army usually does, which is to take steps backwards into Russia. You come at me, I'm going to take steps back, so that you have to come further and further. There's a lot of land in Russia. So if
There's a lot of cold, man.
if you have to chase the Russian army across Russia, you're going to be chasing the Russian army for a really long time. So Napoleon can't defeat them because their stand and fight is to stand and fight and then withdraw. So he keeps having to venture further and further and further into Russia in order to face down the Russian army. And at some point, the Tsar actually broke its treaty with France and began to form a coalition with other countries that were in this map here. So Napoleon tried to attack the Russian army in Poland, and they just withdrew. And so he had to chase them. So he stretched out his whole military so that he had to try to control a piece of, all the way from France all the way into Russia, and it just stretched out his whole military. And behind him, other forces began to coalesce in unity against him. The Prussians, the British, the Austrians, and the Danes formed a military specifically for the purpose of taking out Poland. And they surrounded him at Leipzig and they defeated him. And then he fled back to France and they surrounded him there and forced him to abdicate. They forced him to surrender. When he surrendered, they put him on the island of Elba. He was banished to live alone on the island, not alone because he had a staff, and guards, to live on the island of Elba. They didn't want to kill him because he was an emperor, and that gets into divine appointment. He was an emperor crowned by the Pope. Can you just order the execution of another emperor? So they banished him instead and forced him out. And from this island, he develops even more of a reputation as a romantic hero. His followers in France see him banished to that island and think of him as this heroic character that is waiting to make his comeback, that is waiting to reappear and retake over, and that destiny is in front of him. So that's why Bonaparte is kind of the quintessential romantic hero. This idea of who he was, that he was this hero that had been raised up, that this hero that was outside the system, that relied on his imagination, that relied on his innovation, that was a part of that, romantic idea, allowed him to coalesce enough support to escape from the island of Elba. So we're going to talk, he escapes from the island of Elba and tries again to take over and fails again, but there's a ripple effect from Napoleon's conquest that we're going to talk about on Thursday. So what I want you to talk about today is how much of a grasp do you actually have on that romantic hero idea? Can you think of 5 examples of people that fit into this category, that fit into this? And they don't have to be historical people. They can be, oh, that's not right. They can be people from fiction, even pop fiction, I guess, pop culture right now. But my assignment for you is really easy today. All I want you to do is try to come up with the names of 5 romantic heroes that fit into this category. People who are
Ryan Reynolds, does that count?
That's an actor.
Oh, he's in
Okay.
pop culture.
On the other hand, Deadpool might qualify as a romantic hero. Youthful, innocent, intuitive, wants to be in nature, relies on their intuition rather than their education. Somebody who follows their destiny from wherever it leads, and somebody around whom the structure does not, somebody who doesn't come up, who wasn't shaped to be a hero.
Okay, so do you just want us to provide the examples, or do you want us to explain why they're examples?
I'd like you to just provide them. This is an easy day.
Fair enough.
You can just provide them. If I see one and I'm like, what? But if you
Not
want
necessarily.
to try to justify, that's a good thing. Actually, do I say that in the assignment? Because that's a good question. Oh, yeah, no, I just say name them. So I just say name them. Yeah, people who qualify as this kind of romantic hero. And yeah, they don't have to be historical figures. They can be fictional figures, but that's the assignment for today. Does anybody have any questions about all this stuff that we covered today?
Can you go back to the other slide,
Which one?
the actual,
The actual assignment slide? Sure.
thank you, I was trying.
In your Blackboard. So
Okay, never mind.
yeah, this is a Blackboard assignment.
She was talking about the one you have on your PowerPoint.
This is
That
it.
one, yeah.
Yeah, this is it. Okay.
What could she do?
All right. So any questions about any of this that we covered today? This idea of romanticism. Off the top of your head, based on what you've seen with the Enlightenment and colonialism and all of that, can you already kind of spot where the dangers are in letting romanticism be the next movement? Let's talk about that for a minute. What kind of dangers do you see?
Well, I mean, people thinking emotional as to like that. That's how you end up with like feuds and wars. And
People following their feelings instead of following their, but isn't it your feelings that cause you to know the difference between right and wrong?
oh,
No, what?
you have to think rationally.
Very Guy Fawkes.
You think emotionally to act on one of them.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm gonna see if this makes a difference. It probably doesn't. All right. So how about on Zoom? Where do you see the problems with people leaning more towards romanticism instead of scientific and enlightenment? What do you think?
Science is about to be out the window.
Okay, hey, you said the American Bible. What specifically, what are you talking about?
Oh, we were talking about Mormonism.
Oh, you were talking about, okay. I just have the American Bible in the chat. That's all I have. So you're welcome to make us part of that discussion if you want to.
Isn't that always the answer?
Yeah, the Bible.
Jesus is the answer.
It depends, I guess.
Or is Jesus the
Guy Fawkes was not the Romanticism era.
Say again?
Guy Fawkes was not the Romanticism era. He
Oh.
was 1607.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought that was like way before. So no,
Yeah.
that was part of, that was a
Or 1605, sorry.
anti-monarchical is what Guy Fawkes was. It had to do with overthrowing the monarchy, which, I mean, really, the monarchy was kind of a mess at the time.
Okay, so let me open an example
Yeah.
of romanticism. Could we name Frankenstein as one of those?
As an example of romanticism, that depends who's the romantic hero you're naming.
That would be the monster himself.
You think the monster himself was a romantic hero?
Yes.
Okay,
Wants to be in nature, wasn't shaped to be a hero.
but what heroic action does he take? Because that is actually,
Removing himself from the situation.
oh, I don't know, that's thin. It's thin. But I guess if you can make a case for it.
I mean, I've lost within her, so.
Okay. All right, any others? Okay, well, this is a shorter lecture, I guess, because we're done and it's not even 9:15 yet. So do y'all have any, oh, I know what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about passive voice again, because I have a beef with y'all.
Are there sometimes you can't get rid of, you just can't get rid of husbands?
I don't believe so.
Never.
I don't think that there's ever, if you can't get rid of it by rewriting a sentence, you can get rid of it by rewriting a paragraph. You can get rid of passive voice, you can. But in those 5 sentences I gave you specifically, it's really easy to get rid of them. So I have a complaint about the passive voice assignment. So do me a favor, and if you're on Zoom, let me know that you're here so you're hearing it.
Yeah, I'm hearing it. I also haven't done it yet. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm here.
Either turn
I
on
did it.
cameras or raise your hands or give me a reaction shot or something like that, because I have a beef. Okay. Many of y'all tried to do the passive voice assignment. Some of y'all did it fine. Some of y'all didn't have any trouble at all with it. And that's reflected in the grades that you got. If you got less than a 5, I told you in the feedback which one you got wrong, which one is still in passive voice. But I had an alarmingly large section of the class that tried to change the sentences, instead of trying to change it from passive voice to active voice, who tried to change it from past tense to present tense. Okay, here's the problem with that. If that's what you did, I don't see how you could have been in class that day, first of all. And since I published my Zooms and you could have watched them, obviously you didn't do that either. Okay, so that complete like 180 of understanding about what the assignment was about represents people who weren't in class or were on the Zoom but not paying attention and didn't do any of the other looking around the site to try to figure out what I was talking about. You just guessed. This is my beef. This is a face-to-face class. You, when you registered, that was what you agreed to do. Now, I had a couple of students who contacted me in advance of the semester to say, I know for a fact that I can't be there in person. Are you going to be offering a Zoom? And I already knew that I was going to be offering one. So for those couple of students who caught me in advance, that's fine. But if your decision is, I'm not going to sit in class, I'm not going to sit in the Zoom, I might pretend to be on the Zoom, but I won't really, and I'm not going to go back and review the Zoom later, then a face-to-face class is not what you wanted to take. What you wanted to take was an online independent study class. And if that's the case, you need to ask yourself if it's not time to look at that drop date that's coming up. Because this is a face-to-face class. Now, those students who did that got zeros on those assignments, and that's the grade they've earned, and they're probably going to struggle with the paper too when I grade their papers if they do get those turned in. But the fact that you agreed to come to a face-to-face class and then are now pretending to participate in one and just catching up on the side, it doesn't do you any good, it doesn't do me any good, it's rude to your classmates, it's just not what you signed up for. It's supposed to be a face-to-face class. So I was grouchy when I came in this morning because I looked at those assignments and I was like, some of y'all did great and I appreciate it. Some of y'all obviously tried and are still struggling, and that's fine. You're trying and I get it, and that's fine. But some people are actually just pretending to be in this class, and probably none of the people I'm talking to right now. So that's even a whole different source of frustration, that the people who are listening to me right now aren't the problem. So anyway, as you're making decisions about the future, if you are thinking about, you know, half-ass participating in this class, pretending to be on Zoom, which I totally object to. There's no upside to pretending to be on Zoom. You're going to get the grade you deserve, and that's all I can say about that. The grade you get is going to be the one you earned. So I'm an immunocompromised person who risked being here so I could provide a face-to-face class. If you are struggling with a personal issue in a day, or something is going on, or I understand that everybody has a moment where they can't make it to class, and I appreciate you zooming in if that's the case. But if you've just made a decision not to participate because I gave you a way and you're taking advantage of it, you're going to get the grade you deserve. Because the questions are going to get harder. The essay questions, the little 5-point questions we have are going to start circling around the lectures and not around the PowerPoints. It's going to get harder. So please be thinking about that as you make decisions. I appreciate everybody that's here and everybody that's actively on Zoom right now. I appreciate you all very much, but you're making me grouchy. Okay, that being said, before we wrap up, did anybody want me to go over that passive voice assignment again? Okay, anybody want to take one more look at it?
So the first one about the colonists not being taxed without representation, I tried for a good 20 minutes to rewrite that one.
Okay, I had several people do it successfully.
I don't know if this was right or not, but I mean, you had to look at the source. Who was taxed without representation?
That was one way to solve it.
Yeah.
That's one way to solve it. And that would be one way. Like I said, if you can't rewrite the sentence, you can rewrite the paragraph. Parliament forced. Yes, you can.
That's why, because I didn't want to add a word.
Nobody ever told you you couldn't. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing real quick.
But we don't know that it was Parliament.
No, you don't. So if you don't have the information, how do you solve this problem? The colonists were taxed without representation. I had several people who did this successfully. What happens when you're taxed? What happens to you? What do you do?
You lose money.
How do you lose money?
The government steals it from you?
What do you do with the money?
You have to give it to the people who are taxing.
And what's that called? Giving money to people who are taxing you?
Theft?
Paying taxes. Colonists paid taxes without representation.
Oh, that's sneaky.
I didn't even think of that.
Without any new information, that's a really easy fix. Because all you have to do is ask yourself, how does this become an action?
We don't know they paid their, they were.
I mean, they were pretty active about not paying their
Yeah.
So this sentence is actually a really good example
No
of
shade, no tea, you know.
a sentence where you're going to want to go back and fix it so that you don't have to have this bad sentence. When you're writing your paper, you don't want to have a sentence like this. The colonists were taxed. So you either want to have more information, who taxed them, like Parliament taxed them, the king taxed them, you know, however you want to say that. And maybe it might not be factually 100% correct, but at least it's not passive. Or you want to restructure the sentence so that it is an action that the colonists are taking rather than, and I had somebody do the colonists protested paying taxes without representation, which was factually true and based on the lectures. They protested the taxes. And it also took it from passive to active. So there were lots of innovative solutions to this middle one. It wasn't impossible. You just had to be innovative. You had to be imaginative. Whereas with most of them, I gave you all the information right there in the sentence. So, you know, for the other four,
Yeah, a little bit passive.
On that one, you can just say, can you just say the colonists pay taxes?
sure, that would definitely be a way to fix it.
I just changed were to had. The colonists had been taxed without representation.
Well, see, had been taxed would still have been passive.
I just put,
Now, if you said the colonists
Or
had
had
taxation,
taxation without.
had taxation without representation, that was, I think that was also a good solution. The colonists had taxation without representation. The colonists having it, that's actually an active verb. It's not, you know, still, I would rewrite the whole paragraph so that it
Many
didn't have to be in there.
solutions.
But yeah, I think you can eliminate passive voice pretty much 100%.
For the first one, could you, I don't want to say it because it's probably not going to be the right pronunciation.
Go ahead.
Could you say John Locke's words? Well, it's not going to make sense. Got used
Okay, by who used them?
by Thomas Jefferson.
So where does Thomas Jefferson's name belong in an active sentence? At the beginning. Thomas Jefferson used John Locke's words.
Okay,
So you have to find the doer of the action
Get
in the
the word out
sentence
of
somewhere
put them first.
and move it to the beginning of the sentence and then rewrite the sentence from there. That's the easiest way to get rid of it.
Get rid of words.
And make sure it's in present tense.
Right, so the King and Queen of France were executed by the National Assembly. What was the action that took place? Right, and who did that?
The National Assembly executed him.
Right, the National Assembly executed the King and Queen of France. Now it's an active sentence. Okay.
Still active.
What it definitely does not need to be is in the present tense. Oh my gosh, this is history. Everything is in the simple past tense that you can put in the simple past tense.
Wait, so how did they make it into present tense?
Now we would be getting into revealing other students' work, which would be a violation of FERPA if I answered that. But
okay.
the example of somebody who was actually switching something from past tense to present tense would be to say the King and Queen of France are executed, are being executed by the National Assembly. Like it's happening right now, and that's absolutely.
That physically hurt you to say.
It's also still passive. That's the thing. They changed it to present tense and still left it passive.
So
So
like you
like,
look like you were struggling to even get that sentence out.
okay, I don't break out in hives as bad as some of my teachers passive. And the issue with it is that I know that you will have teachers that do, and it's an easy thing to fix, and that I can help you with that. But I will grade you for it on the next paper. I will mark it. Simple past tense, passive voice, or active voice. Simple past tense and active voice is what you want to go for. So anyway, all of these assignments are open to be redone and redone until you get a 5 on them. It's fine to try again. But if you are seriously having trouble grasping this concept, that's okay. A lot of people do. A lot of really brilliant writers do. Have to have an editor go through and go, this is passive, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this. This is a tough concept to get. Yes?
Speaking of which, when is the next paper going to be due?
When is the next paper due? The next
The
paper,
14th.
the World Stage Project, the interactions essay due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, March 14th.
Woo!
I believe in you. Like a lot.
Yeah, because I switched your other classes due date.
Yeah, I made it so that my classes don't have big things due on the same day. So that's why when you said it was the 14th, I was like, no, it's not. You can't. All right, I'm sorry for being harsh with y'all about that, because y'all aren't the ones that message needs to get to, actually, because you're actually here. In one form or another, you're here. So I appreciate you for being here. But hopefully you're rewarded for your presence, hopefully. Any questions or anything else we need to cover? All right, our time is actually up now. So y'all have a great evening. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you on Thursday.
Have a good
See you
day.
tomorrow.